The dust from the stagecoach still hung in the air when Adelaide Zimmerman stepped down onto the wooden planks of Miles City, Montana. Her leather traveling bag clutched tight in her gloved hand, knowing full well that what she carried inside her wasn't just clothing and a few precious belongings, but the weight of a secret that had driven away every man who'd ever tried to court her back in Philadelphia. It was the summer of 1883, and the frontier town stretched before her like a promise of reinvention, all false-fronted buildings and weathered wood beneath a sky so impossibly wide it made her chest ache with something between freedom and loneliness. She'd come west to start a dress shop, to build a life with her own two hands, and to never again see that look in a man's eyes when she told him the truth about her broken body. The heat pressed down on her shoulders as she surveyed the main street, noting the saloon, the general store, the livery stable that smelled of hay and horse sweat even from a distance. A few men loitered outside the saloon, their eyes tracking her movement with the lazy curiosity of those who had nothing better to occupy their afternoon. She lifted her chin and walked toward the hotel, her boots clicking against the boards, refusing to be intimidated by this rough place she'd chosen as her sanctuary. The hotel lobby was mercifully cool, dim after the brightness outside. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair looked up from the front desk, her face creasing into a welcoming smile that Adelaide hadn't expected. "You must be Miss Zimmerman. We got your telegram last week. I'm Constance Miller, and my husband Edward owns this establishment." "Please, call me Adelaide." She set her bag down, grateful for the genuine warmth in the woman's voice. "We don't get many single ladies setting up business here, but I think it's wonderful. Lord knows this town could use a proper dressmaker. Most of the women have been making do with catalog orders or their own poor attempts with a needle." Constance handed her a key. "I've put you in our best room, second floor, faces the street so you'll get the morning light." Adelaide spent the rest of that first day exploring the town, introducing herself to shopkeepers, and examining the small building she'd arranged to lease for her dress shop. It sat between the general store and a law office, a narrow space with large windows that would be perfect for displaying her work. The previous tenant had been a cobbler who'd moved on to better prospects in Helena, and the space still smelled faintly of leather and shoe polish. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Adelaide found herself drawn to the edge of town where a corral stretched along a creek bed. Several horses moved within the enclosure, their coats gleaming in the golden light. A man stood among them, tall and lean, his movements deliberate and calm as he worked with a young chestnut mare on a lead rope. Even from a distance, Adelaide could see the patience in his posture, the quiet confidence that came from understanding the animals in his care. She shouldn't have lingered, but something about the scene held her attention. The man turned, and even across the space between them, she felt the jolt of his gaze meeting hers. He had dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes that seemed to assess her with careful interest, rather than the crude appraisal she'd endured from the men outside the saloon. He said something to the horse, gave her neck a pat, and walked toward the fence where Adelaide stood. His gait was easy, unhurried, like a man who'd never rushed a day in his life. "Evening, madam." His voice carried a slight drawl, warm as honey. "You're new to Miles City." It wasn't a question, and Adelaide found herself fighting a smile. Is it that obvious? Small town. Word travels faster than a spooked Mustang. He rested his forearms on the top rail of the fence, and she caught the scent of horses and sage and clean sweat. "I'm Fletcher Owens. I run the horse ranch about 3 miles north of here, but I keep these corrals in town for training and sales." Adelaide Zimmerman. She didn't offer her hand across the fence, and he didn't seem to expect it. "I'm opening a dress shop on Main Street." Something flickered in his expression, an approval that made her suddenly self-conscious. "That's so. Well, I reckon you'll do good business. My sister Martha's been complaining for years about having to order everything from catalogs and waiting months for delivery. You have a sister here." Martha and her husband Robert own the Mercantile. You probably met them already if you've been walking around introducing yourself. He shifted his weight, and the motion drew her attention to the way his shirt stretched across broad shoulders. "How are you finding Miles City so far?" Adelaide looked back toward the town, considering. "It's different from Philadelphia, rougher, but there's something honest about it, like people are exactly who they appear to be." Fletcher made a thoughtful sound. "That's a generous assessment. Some folks out here are running from something back east, trying to be someone new. Not all of them succeed." She met his eyes again, wondering if he could somehow sense that she was one of those people, fleeing from expectations and disappointments that had become unbearable. "And you? Are you trying to be someone new?" "No, madam. I was born not 50 miles from here, and I've never pretended to be anything but what I am." He said it without arrogance, just a simple statement of fact. A man who's good with horses and not much good at anything else. "I doubt that's true." A slight smile tugged at his mouth, transforming his serious face into something that made her heart skip in a way she'd thought herself too practical to experience. "You're kind to say so, but I know my limitations. Can rope a steer, break a horse, build a barn if I have to. But put me in a fancy drawing room back east and I'd be useless as a three-legged chair. Fortunate, then, that there aren't many fancy drawing rooms in Montana." His smile widened. "Very fortunate indeed." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the horses. The mare Fletcher had been working with came to the fence, nosing at his shoulder until he reached up to scratch behind her ears. "She's beautiful," Adelaide said. "Getting there. She was half wild when I got her, wouldn't let anyone within 10 feet, but she's learning to trust." His hands moved gently over the horse's face, and Adelaide found herself wondering what those hands would feel like, then immediately pushing the thought away. She hadn't come to Montana to entangle herself with a man, no matter how kind his eyes or gentle his touch with frightened animals. "I should get back to the hotel," she said, even though part of her wanted to stay in this peaceful place, listening to his slow drawl and watching the sunset deepen. "Let me walk you. It's getting dark, and not everyone in town is as harmless as they ought to be." Adelaide wanted to protest that she could manage, but the truth was she'd feel safer with him beside her. She nodded, and Fletcher gave the mare a final pat before opening the gate and joining her on the road. They walked slowly, and Adelaide found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her, tall enough that she had to tilt her head to look at his face. He kept a respectful distance, but she caught him glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking. "What made you choose Miles City?" he asked as they approached the hotel. Adelaide had prepared answers for this question, practiced responses that were true enough without revealing everything. "I wanted to build something of my own. Back in Philadelphia, I was living in my brother's house, helping raise his children, existing on the edges of someone else's life. I wanted my own purpose." "That's brave." He said it simply, but she heard the admiration underneath, or foolish. "I won't know which until I see whether my shop succeeds or fails." "It'll succeed." He spoke with such certainty that she laughed. "You can't possibly know that." "I know determination when I see it. You've got the look of someone who doesn't give up easy." They'd reached the hotel steps, and he turned to face her fully. "If you need anything, help moving furniture or fixing up the shop, you can find me here most mornings or at my ranch. Anyone can give you directions." "Thank you, Mr. Owens. That's very kind." Fletcher, he corrected gently. We're not much for formality out here. Fletcher, then, and you should call me Adelaide. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was somehow both old-fashioned and natural. Have a good evening, Adelaide. I imagine I'll be seeing you around. She watched him walk back toward the corrals, his long stride eating up the distance, before she turned and climbed the steps to the hotel. Inside her room, she sat on the bed and pressed her hands against her stomach, against the place where the doctor had told her, with clinical detachment, that she would never carry a child. The fever that had nearly killed her at 16 had left her barren, a word that sounded like a desert landscape, empty and incapable of sustaining life. She told her fiancé, Robert, 6 months before their planned wedding. He'd been kind about it, gentle even, but she'd seen the death of their future in his eyes. He'd wanted children, lots of them, and without that possibility, what was the point? The engagement had ended quietly, and Adelaide had endured the pitying looks from her family, the suggestions that perhaps she should simply accept her role as the maiden aunt, useful for helping with other people's children since she'd never have her own. Coming west had been an act of defiance, a refusal to spend her life as a shadow in someone else's home. But she'd promised herself she wouldn't mislead any man, wouldn't let another person build dreams around her that she couldn't fulfill. If Fletcher Owens was interested in her, and the warmth in his eyes suggested he might be, she'd have to tell him the truth before anything could develop between them. The thought made her throat tight with preemptive grief, but she pushed it aside. She'd deal with that if and when the time came. For now, she had a shop to establish and a new life to build. The next morning, Adelaide rose early and began the work of transforming the empty shop into something welcoming. She'd shipped trunks ahead containing bolts of fabric, her sewing machine, and supplies. The freight office had delivered them the previous afternoon, and now she faced the task of organizing everything. She was standing on a chair, attempting to hang curtains in the front window when the door opened and a woman's voice called out, "Hello, are you Adelaide Zimmerman?" Adelaide looked down to find a pleasant-faced woman in her early 30s, blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing a simple calico dress. "I am. Please excuse me, I'm not quite ready to receive visitors." "Oh, I'm not a customer." "Well, I will be, but that's not why I'm here now." The woman came farther into the shop. "I'm Martha Bennett. My brother Fletcher mentioned you'd arrived and were setting up shop, so I thought I'd come by and see if you needed help." Adelaide climbed down from the chair, brushing dust from her skirt. "Your brother was very kind when we met yesterday, and yes, I would appreciate help if you have the time to spare." Martha rolled up her sleeves with the efficiency of someone accustomed to hard work. "Robert can manage the store for a few hours. Lord knows he likes being in charge anyway." Her smile was affectionate. "Now, what do you need done?" Working together, they made quick progress. Martha proved to have a good eye for arrangement, helping Adelaide position the cutting table near the best light and organizing the bolts of fabric by color and weight. As they worked, Martha kept up a steady stream of conversation, filling Adelaide in on the town's residents and dynamics. "There are about 800 people in Miles City now, maybe more. We're growing fast since the railroad came through. Most folks are decent, some are rough around the edges, but that's to be expected in a town like this." Martha handed Adelaide a box of thread. "The women will be so grateful for your services. There's Mrs. Chen. She does some sewing, but she's getting older and her eyesight isn't what it was. You'll need to decide what kind of clientele you want." "What do you mean?" Martha hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Well, there's the respectable women, the wives and daughters, but there's also the girls who work at the saloon. Some dressmakers won't serve them, but their money spends just as well, and they usually want fancier things than the rest of us can justify. Adelaide considered this. I'll serve anyone who comes through my door and can pay for the work. I'm not interested in judging how women make their living. Martha's expression warmed. I'm glad to hear it. You'll get some sideways looks from the church ladies, but I think you've got the spine to handle it. By midday, the shop looked transformed. The curtains hung straight in the windows, the fabric was displayed attractively, and Adelaide's sewing machine sat ready on the work table. Martha insisted on treating her to lunch at the hotel restaurant, and they sat over soup and bread while Martha continued her friendly interrogation. Fletcher seemed quite taken with you, Martha said casually, buttering a piece of bread. Adelaide felt heat rise in her cheeks. We only spoke for a few minutes. That's more than he usually talks to women. My brother's been something of a hermit since Sarah died. The name dropped between them like a stone. Adelaide set down her spoon carefully. I'm sorry. I didn't know he'd lost someone. Martha looked stricken. Oh Lord, I shouldn't have mentioned it. Fletcher would skin me if he knew I was gossiping about him. It's just that it's been 5 years, and I keep hoping he'll move on, find someone who makes him smile the way you did yesterday. He smiled, according to Robert, who saw you two walking back from the corrals. Fletcher was practically beaming, which for him is the equivalent of normal people doing cartwheels. Martha reached across the table and squeezed Adelaide's hand. I'm not trying to matchmake, truly. I just want you to know he's a good man, the best I've ever known. If he shows interest in you, it's genuine. Adelaide swallowed against the lump in her throat. What happened to Sarah? She was his fiancée. Got sick with pneumonia one winter, and it took her in less than a week. They were supposed to marry that spring. Martha's eyes were sad. He blamed himself for not getting her to the doctor sooner, though there was nothing anyone could have done. Since then, he's thrown himself into his work and hasn't looked twice at any woman until you. The weight of this information settled over Adelaide. She understood grief, understood how loss could reshape a person's entire landscape. But it also complicated things. If Fletcher had loved Sarah deeply, had planned a life with her, what would he think when Adelaide told him she couldn't give him the family he'd surely wanted to build with his first love? That afternoon, Adelaide opened her shop for business, hanging a hand-painted sign in the window that read Adelaide's Dressmaking and Alterations. Within an hour, she had her first customer, a rancher's wife who needed 3 dresses made for her daughters. By evening, she'd taken measurements for 5 more women and had enough work to keep her busy for weeks. She was closing up, pulling the shades and locking the door, when she saw Fletcher ride past on a beautiful bay gelding. He noticed her and reined in, dismounting with the easy grace of someone who'd spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. Looks like you had a good first day, he said, nodding toward the shop window. Better than I'd hoped. Your sister sent half the women in town my direction. That sounds like Martha. She never could mind her own business, though it usually works out for the best. He held the horse's reins loosely, and the animal stood quiet beside him. I was wondering if you might like to see my ranch tomorrow. It's Sunday, and I thought you might need a break from setting up shop. I could pack a lunch, show you some of the country. Adelaide's heart kicked against her ribs. Every sensible part of her said she should refuse, should maintain distance, should protect both of them from inevitable disappointment. But when she looked at his face, at the hope and hesitation there, she found herself nodding. I'd like that very much. His smile was worth every bit of the heartache she suspected was coming. I'll pick you up at the hotel around 9 if that suits you. Perfect. She watched him ride away, then walked back to the hotel in the soft evening light, wondering what she was doing, knowing she should be more careful with both their hearts, but unable to resist the pull she felt toward him. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the summer heat still manageable in the early hours. Adelaide dressed carefully in a simple blue cotton dress, practical for riding but still flattering, then immediately felt foolish for caring how she looked. She braided her dark hair, pinning it up securely, and tried to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. Fletcher arrived exactly at 9, driving a small buckboard rather than riding horseback. He helped her up onto the seat with hands that were strong and careful, and Adelaide tried not to think about the warmth of his touch through her sleeve. They drove north out of town, following a rough road that wound through grassland dotted with wildflowers. Fletcher kept up an easy conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the area. He was a natural storyteller, his voice wryly humorous, and Adelaide found herself relaxing, laughing at his descriptions of various mishaps and adventures. The ranch appeared after about 40 minutes of driving, nestled in a valley where a creek ran clear and cold. The house was modest but well built, logs chinked tight against Montana winters. A barn and several corrals spread out behind it, and Adelaide could see horses grazing in a larger pasture beyond. "It's not much," Fletcher said, and she heard the vulnerability in his voice. "It's beautiful, peaceful." He seemed pleased by her assessment. "Let me show you around, then we can have lunch down by the creek." She spent the next hour touring the ranch, watching Fletcher work with several horses in various stages of training. His patience was remarkable, his instinct for what each animal needed almost uncanny. He introduced her to each horse by name, telling her their histories and personalities as though they were people he cared deeply about. "You love this," Adelaide said, watching him gentle a skittish mare. "It's the only thing I've ever been truly good at. Understanding what they need, earning their trust." He glanced at her over the mare's neck. "Horses are honest. They don't pretend to feel things they don't, and they don't lie about what scares them. I appreciate that. Unlike people." "Unlike people," he agreed. They ate lunch sitting on a blanket near the creek, the water providing a constant gentle soundtrack. Fletcher had packed fried chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and apples, along with a jar of lemonade that had stayed miraculously cool. Adelaide was hungrier than she'd realized, and they ate in companionable silence for a while. "Can I ask you something?" Fletcher said eventually, his voice tentative. Adelaide's stomach tightened, but she nodded. "Why did you really come west?" "I know you said you wanted your own purpose, but there's something else, something you're running from." She should have been offended by his presumption, but his tone was gentle, and she'd already learned he was perceptive. Adelaide set down the apple she'd been eating and looked at the creek, gathering her courage. "I was engaged once. It didn't work out." She kept her voice steady with effort. "After that ended, I realized I couldn't stay in Philadelphia, living half a life, being useful but never truly needed for myself. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." He was quiet for a moment. "Martha told you about Sarah." "She did. I'm sorry for your loss." Fletcher picked up a stone and tossed it into the creek, watching the ripples spread. "I loved her very much. Thought we'd grow old together, build a life, have children running all over this ranch." His voice was rough with old grief. "When she died, part of me died too. I couldn't imagine ever wanting those things with anyone else." Adelaide's throat constricted. "And now," he turned to look at her directly, his eyes intense. "Now I'm sitting here with you, and for the first time in 5 years, I can imagine wanting things again. Not the same things, not a replacement for what I lost, but something new, something with you." She should tell him now, should explain why that couldn't happen, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she said, "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're brave and determined and kind. I know you don't judge people harshly. I know when you smile, it makes me feel like I've been asleep for years and just woke up." He shifted closer on the blanket. "I know this is fast, maybe too fast, but I'm not a young man anymore, Adelaide. I'm 32 years old and I've learned that life is short and uncertain. When something feels right, you don't waste time." Adelaide's chest ached with wanting to lean into him, to accept what he was offering. "What if I'm not what you think I am? What if I can't give you what you want?" "All I want is you. Everything else we figure out as we go." It would be so easy to believe him, to pretend that love could be enough, but she'd already traveled this road once before. Adelaide stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. "There's something you need to know about me. Something that ended my engagement." Fletcher rose too, his expression wary but open. "All right." The words were harder to say than she'd anticipated, even though she'd practiced them countless times. "When I was 16, I had a severe fever. It nearly killed me, and it left me unable to bear children. I'm barren, Fletcher. I can never give you the family you wanted with Sarah, the children you dreamed about." She forced herself to look at him, to witness the moment when his feelings changed, when the warmth in his eyes turned to disappointment or pity. But his expression didn't change. He stood there, solid and steady, watching her with the same gentle attention he'd shown all day. "Is that all?" he said finally. Adelaide blinked. "Is that all? Fletcher, I just told you I can't have children." He closed the distance between them, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "And I heard you, but Adelaide, I need you to hear me now." His voice was firm but tender. "I loved Sarah, and yes, we talked about having children. But that was a different dream with a different person. What I feel for you isn't about trying to recreate what I lost. It's about the woman standing in front of me right now." "But you said you wanted children running all over the ranch," she whispered. "5 years ago I did. But 5 years ago I was a different man with different dreams. I've spent half a decade learning to live with disappointment, with things not going the way I planned." He ducked his head to meet her eyes. "If children were what mattered most to me, I could have courted any number of women in the last 5 years. But I didn't, because none of them made me feel the way you do." "And how is that, alive?" he said simply. "Like the world has color again instead of being all gray. Like maybe the best parts of my life aren't all behind me." Adelaide felt tears slip down her cheeks. "But what if you change your mind? What if in a year or 2 or 5 you resent me for what I can't give you?" Fletcher wiped her tears away with his thumbs, his touch infinitely gentle. "What if in a year or 2 or 5 I wake up every morning grateful that you took a chance on me? Adelaide, life doesn't come with guarantees. Sarah and I were young and healthy and planning our future, and she still died before we could marry. The only thing we can control is what we do right now in this moment. So what do you want to do right now?" He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "I want to court you properly. Take you to dinner, walk with you in the evenings, learn everything about you. And if you'll let me, somewhere down the line I want to marry you and build a life together, whatever that life looks like. Even without children." "Then I'll love just you," Fletcher said, his voice steady and sure. "Adelaide, I mean this with everything in me. If it's just us for the rest of our lives, that's more than enough. You're enough." She couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she did the only thing that made sense. She kissed him. It was brief and chaste, but it held all the hope and fear and longing she couldn't put into words. When she pulled back, Fletcher was looking at her with wonder. "Is that a yes to courting?" he asked, a smile playing at his lips. "It's a yes," she managed. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Adelaide rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For the first time since her doctor had delivered his diagnosis years ago, she allowed herself to believe that maybe her life wasn't defined by what she couldn't do, but by who she chose to be and who chose her in return. They stayed by the creek for another hour, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their futures. Fletcher told her about growing up on a ranch, about learning horsemanship from his father, about the hard years after his parents died and he'd taken over the ranch at 23. Adelaide talked about Philadelphia, about her close-knit family, about discovering her gift for sewing and design. "Do you miss it?" Fletcher asked. "The city," Adelaide considered the question carefully. "I miss my family sometimes. My younger sister Emma especially, we were very close. But I don't miss the life I was living there. I felt like I was shrinking, becoming smaller and quieter, trying not to take up too much space in a world that didn't quite have room for me." "You should never have to make yourself smaller," Fletcher said fiercely. "No," she agreed. "I shouldn't. And out here I don't have to." The summer passed in a golden haze of courtship and work. Adelaide's dress shop flourished beyond her expectations. Women came from miles around once word spread about her skill with a needle and her reasonable prices. She sewed wedding dresses and everyday work clothes, fancy gowns for the saloon girls and simple frocks for ranchers' wives. She treated every customer with the same respect and care, earning a reputation for both quality work and gracious service. Fletcher was a constant presence in her life, though he was careful to respect her reputation. He took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant every Saturday evening, walked her home from the shop most evenings when he was in town, and took her on long Sunday rides to explore the countryside around Miles City. They talked about everything. Fletcher shared his dreams of expanding his ranch, of developing a breeding program for quality horses. Adelaide talked about maybe hiring help for the shop, about teaching sewing classes for young girls. But mostly they talked about the everyday details of their lives, the small observations and moments that built intimacy between two people. Martha became a close friend, often stopping by the shop to chat, and invariably pushing Adelaide toward faster progress with Fletcher. "He's smitten," she'd say with satisfaction. "I haven't seen him this happy since before Sarah died." The comment should have made Adelaide uncomfortable, but somehow it didn't. She'd come to understand that Fletcher's love for Sarah and his growing feelings for her weren't in competition. They were different things, existing in different chambers of his heart, both valid and real. In August, Fletcher invited her to a dance being held in the town hall. Adelaide made herself a new dress for the occasion, deep green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, with a fitted bodice and full skirt perfect for dancing. When Fletcher saw her that evening, his eyes went wide. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice slightly strangled. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she teased. He'd worn his best clothes, a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean build, his hair still damp from washing. The dance was crowded and lively, the small space packed with townspeople eager for entertainment and socializing. A local band played enthusiastically, if not always skillfully, and couples filled the floor. Fletcher proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, leading Adelaide through waltzes and reels with easy confidence. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked, breathless and laughing after a particularly energetic reel. "My mother insisted. Said a man needed to know how to conduct himself properly in any situation, even if he planned to spend most of his life on a ranch." His arm tightened around her waist. "I'm grateful for her insistence right now." Between dances, they stood at the edge of the floor, drinking punch and watching the crowd. Adelaide noticed a few disapproving looks from some of the older women, and she knew it was because she'd served the saloon girls without judgment. But most people seemed accepting, even friendly, and she refused to let a few sour faces diminish her happiness. Fletcher noticed the direction of her gaze. "Mrs. Pritchard giving you trouble? Just some looks. Nothing I can't handle. You shouldn't have to handle anything." He set down his cup with barely restrained irritation. "You're the most talented dressmaker this town has ever seen, and you treat everyone with kindness. If some people can't appreciate that, it's their loss." Adelaide touched his arm gently. "It's all right, truly. I knew there would be some who disapproved. I can live with it." He covered her hand with his expression softening. "You're a better person than I am. I want to tell them all exactly what I think of their small-minded judgment. But you won't, because it would just cause trouble and you're too practical for that." A reluctant smile tugged at his mouth. "You know me too well already." As the evening wore on and the air grew thick with the heat of so many bodies, Fletcher suggested they step outside for some air. The night was cool and clear, a blessed relief after the stuffy hall. They walked slowly down the street, the music following them faintly. "Adelaide," Fletcher said, his voice unusually tentative, "we've been courting for 3 months now. Has it only been 3 months? It feels both longer and shorter than that." "I know what you mean." He guided her to a bench outside the hotel and they sat, the dance music drifting on the night air. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me when I say it." Adelaide's heart began to race. "All right." Fletcher turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I love you. I'm in love with you. I know it's fast, and maybe I should wait longer to say it, but I've already wasted 5 years of my life being half alive, and I don't want to waste another minute not telling you how I feel." Tears pricked Adelaide's eyes. "Fletcher, wait, let me finish." He squeezed her hands gently. "I want to marry you, Adelaide. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every evening. I want to build a life with you, whatever that life looks like. I know you told me about not being able to have children, and I heard you, truly heard you. It doesn't change how I feel or what I want." "Are you proposing?" Adelaide asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet. Not until I'm absolutely sure you understand what I'm saying." He lifted one of her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "I don't need children to be happy, Adelaide. I need you, just you. If it's just the two of us for the next 50 years, that's the life I want. You're not broken or less than because you can't bear children. You're perfect exactly as you are." The tears spilled over then, running down her cheeks. "I love you too," she said. "I've loved you since that day by the creek when you said you'd love just me. I've been so scared to believe it could be real, that someone could want me without reservation." "It's real," Fletcher promised. "As real as anything I've ever felt, so I'm asking you now officially. Adelaide Zimmerman, will you marry me?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes, absolutely yes." Fletcher pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small emerald. "It was my grandmother's. She left it to me before she died, told me to give it to someone truly special." He slipped it onto Adelaide's finger and it fit perfectly. "I think she'd approve of you." Adelaide laughed through her tears, looking at the ring sparkling in the lamplight. "It's beautiful. Everything is beautiful." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, longer and deeper than their first kiss by the creek, a kiss that promised forever. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "How soon can we get married?" he asked. "How soon do you want to? Tomorrow?" Adelaide laughed. "I need at least a few weeks to make a wedding dress, unless you want me to get married in something I've already made." "I don't care what you wear, I just want you to be my wife." 2 weeks, she compromised. "I can make a dress in 2 weeks if I work fast." Fletcher groaned but smiled. 2 weeks. I suppose I can wait that long." They returned to the dance, but Adelaide barely remembered the rest of the evening. She was floating, overwhelmed by happiness, by the sure knowledge that she'd found something she'd never thought possible. When Fletcher finally walked her back to the hotel, he kissed her goodnight at the door, lingering as though unable to bear parting. 2 weeks, he murmured against her lips. 2 weeks, she agreed. The next morning, Adelaide woke early and immediately began working on her wedding dress. She'd chosen a cream silk she'd been saving for something special, delicate and beautiful. She worked with a precision born of joy, every stitch a small prayer of gratitude. Martha arrived mid-morning, bursting with excitement. "Fletcher told me the news. Oh, Adelaide, I'm so happy I could burst. You're going to be my sister officially now." "I hope you don't mind having me as family," Adelaide said, smiling at her friend's enthusiasm. "Mind. It's the best thing that could happen. Fletcher's been lost for so long and you've brought him back to life." Martha hugged her tightly. "Now, what can I do to help with the wedding?" Between working on her dress and managing her regular shop orders, Adelaide had little time to worry or second-guess her decision. The town rallied around the upcoming wedding with surprising enthusiasm. Mrs. Miller offered to host the reception at the hotel dining room. The minister, a kind man named Reverend Thomas, agreed to perform the ceremony. Even some of the women who'd initially been standoffish softened, caught up in the romance of it all. Fletcher stopped by the shop every evening, though Adelaide wouldn't let him see the dress. "It's bad luck," she insisted, shooing him away from the workroom. "I don't believe in luck. I believe in you and me and the promises we're making. Still, humor me." He'd smile and leave, but not before stealing a kiss that left her breathless. The night before the wedding, Adelaide sat in her hotel room with the finished dress hanging on the wardrobe door. It was beautiful, perhaps the best work she'd ever done, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, the silk falling in soft folds to the floor. She should have been nervous, should have been questioning her decision, but all she felt was certainty and peace. A knock at her door proved to be Martha, carrying a small package. "This came for you on the afternoon train from Philadelphia." Adelaide recognized her sister Emma's handwriting on the package. Inside was a letter and a small box. She opened the letter first. "My dearest Adelaide, your letter about Fletcher and your upcoming marriage filled my heart with such joy. I wish I could be there to see you wed, but since I cannot, please accept this as my gift. It was Mother's, and she would want you to have it for your special day. Wear it knowing that you are loved, not just by your new husband, but by your family who misses you terribly and wishes you every happiness. Your loving sister." Emma. Inside the smaller box was a pearl necklace that had belonged to their mother, who'd passed away 4 years earlier. Adelaide's vision blurred with tears as she lifted it out. "It's lovely," Martha said softly. "Your mother had excellent taste. She did." Adelaide clasped it around her neck, the pearls lying cool against her throat. "Now I'll have family with me tomorrow after all." The wedding dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect late August days that seemed designed for celebration. Adelaide dressed carefully, her hands steady as she fastened the buttons of her wedding dress. Martha helped arrange her hair, pinning it up in a soft style that framed her face. "You look like an angel," Martha said, her eyes bright with tears. "I look like a woman who's about to marry the best man I've ever known," Adelaide corrected gently. The ceremony was held at the small church at the edge of town. As Adelaide walked down the aisle on Robert's arm, he having graciously agreed to give her away, her eyes found Fletcher's and didn't waver. He stood at the front of the church in a new suit, his expression full of such love and wonder that it took her breath away. Reverend Thomas kept the ceremony simple and heartfelt. When it came time for the vows, Fletcher's voice was steady and clear as he promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his life. Adelaide's voice shook only slightly as she made the same promises in return. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thomas said with a broad smile. "Fletcher, you may kiss your bride." And he did, thoroughly and sweetly, while the small crowd of townspeople applauded and cheered. When they finally pulled apart, both grinning, Adelaide felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The reception at the hotel was lively and joyful, full of good food and music and dancing. Adelaide danced with Fletcher until her feet ached, then danced some more because she couldn't bear to be separated from him. Various townspeople came by to offer congratulations and well wishes, and Adelaide was touched by the genuine warmth in most of their faces. As the evening drew to a close, Fletcher leaned close to whisper in her ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Owens." The name sent a thrill through her. More than ready. They decided to live at Fletcher's ranch, and Adelaide had already moved most of her belongings out there over the past week. The house had felt like home from the first time she'd seen it, and now it would truly be hers. The drive out to the ranch was quiet and peaceful, both of them content to simply be together after the excitement of the day. The sun had set by the time they arrived, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Fletcher helped Adelaide down from the buckboard and swept her up in his arms, carrying her across the threshold of their home. Inside, he'd lit lamps that cast a warm glow over everything, and Adelaide noticed fresh wildflowers on the table, a thoughtful touch that made her love him even more. He set her down gently, his hands lingering at her waist. "I love you, Adelaide Owens. I love you too." She reached up to cup his face, memorizing every detail of this moment. "Thank you for seeing me, for wanting me exactly as I am. Thank you for taking a chance on a broken-down horse rancher," he said with a slight smile. "You're not broken down. You're perfect." He kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of promise, and Adelaide surrendered to the joy of belonging completely to someone who belonged completely to her. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to share space and coordinate lives, but Adelaide found the process more joyful than difficult. She continued running her dress shop in town, driving in several days a week to meet with customers and work on orders. Fletcher had built her a small workroom in the house as a wedding gift, so she could also sew at home when she wanted. They fell into comfortable routines. Fletcher would rise before dawn to tend the horses and work on the ranch. Adelaide would join him for breakfast, then either head into town or work in her home studio. Evenings were spent together, cooking dinner, talking about their days, sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "I never knew contentment could feel like this," Fletcher said one evening as they sat together on the porch swing, Adelaide tucked against his side. "Like what?" "Effortless, natural, like breathing." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Every day with you feels like a gift." Adelaide turned her face up to his. "Even when I burn dinner, especially then because we get to eat my cooking instead, which is much better." He laughed when she swatted his arm. "I'm teasing. I love your cooking, burnt or otherwise." As fall arrived and the landscape turned gold and russet, Adelaide found herself thinking more about the question of children. Not with regret, but with curiosity about what their life might look like without them. She and Fletcher had discussed it several times, always circling back to the same conclusion. They were happy with just the two of them. But one day in late October, while working at her shop in town, Adelaide had a visitor who would change the course of their thinking. A young woman came in, barely into her 20s, carrying a baby wrapped in a thin blanket that had seen better days. The woman's clothes were worn and patched, her face exhausted. "Are you Adelaide Owens?" the woman asked hesitantly. "I am. How can I help you? My name is Lucy Carter." "I heard you sometimes trade work for goods or services. I need a dress, something decent, for a job interview at the hotel, but I don't have money to pay you." Adelaide studied the woman and child, noting the pride fighting with desperation in Lucy's face. "What kind of work can you offer?" "I can clean. I'm good at it, thorough and quick, or I can help with sewing if you need it, though I'm not as skilled as you." Lucy shifted the baby to her other hip. "Please, I need this job. My husband died 6 months ago in a logging accident, and I've been scraping by ever since. But the charity is running out and I need steady work." Adelaide made a decision. "Come back tomorrow morning. I'll have a dress ready for you and we'll talk about payment after you get the job." Lucy's eyes filled with tears. Thank you so much." After Lucy left, Adelaide found herself thinking about the young woman and her baby for the rest of the day. She mentioned it to Fletcher that evening over dinner. "That's kind of you," he said, "making her a dress on credit. She reminded me of myself in some ways." Desperate to make her own way, to build something from nothing. Adelaide pushed food around her plate. "I keep thinking about that baby. He looked so small and fragile." Fletcher reached across the table to cover her hand with his. "You have a tender heart. You ever think about it?" Adelaide asked quietly. "About what our life would be like if we had children." "Sometimes," he admitted. "But not with regret. More with curiosity, I suppose. Why do you ask?" Adelaide wasn't sure how to articulate what she was feeling. "I've been so focused on what I can't do, on protecting you from disappointment, that I never really thought about other possibilities." Fletcher's expression grew thoughtful. "What kind of possibilities?" "There are children who need families. Orphans, children whose parents have died like Lucy's husband died. What if we could offer a home to a child who needs one?" Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, turning the idea over in his mind. "You're talking about adoption?" "Maybe, or fostering. I don't know exactly. I just keep thinking that love doesn't have to look one specific way. We have so much to offer, this beautiful home and a good life. Maybe it's selfish to keep it all to ourselves when there are children who need exactly what we have." He stood and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. "There's nothing selfish about the life we've built, but if you want to open our home and hearts to a child who needs us, I'm willing to think about it seriously." "Really, really?" He pulled back to look at her face. "I meant what I said, Adelaide. I'm happy with just you, but I'm also open to our family taking whatever shape feels right for both of us. If that includes children, whether they come to us through adoption or some other way, then we'll figure it out together." Adelaide hugged him tightly, overwhelmed with love for this man who was willing to consider every possibility with an open heart. Lucy got the job at the hotel and insisted on paying Adelaide back through cleaning services. She came to the shop once a week, scrubbing floors and washing windows, and gradually the two women became friends. Adelaide learned that Lucy's husband had been a good man who'd simply been in the wrong place when a widowmaker log fell. Lucy was left with a baby, no family nearby, and limited options for survival. In December, Lucy came to Adelaide with tears streaming down her face. "I'm being evicted. The landlord is selling the building, and I can't find anywhere else I can afford. I've been asking everyone I know, but there's nothing available that I can manage on my wages." Adelaide didn't hesitate. "Come stay with us at the ranch. We have plenty of room and you can help around the house in exchange for room and board while you save up." Lucy looked stunned. "I couldn't impose like that. It's not an imposition. Fletcher and I have been talking about opening our home anyway. This just moves up our timeline a bit." Adelaide took Lucy's hands. "Please, let us help you." When Adelaide told Fletcher that evening, he agreed immediately. Of course she should come stay. How soon can she move out there? "Tomorrow, if that works for you." "Tomorrow's perfect." Lucy and baby Thomas, named after his late father, moved into the small guest room. Almost immediately, the house felt more alive. Thomas's baby babbles and occasional cries filled the quiet spaces. Lucy proved to be helpful and unobtrusive, taking over much of the cooking and cleaning without being asked, grateful for the stability and safety the ranch provided. Adelaide found herself enchanted by baby Thomas. He was 9 months old, just learning to crawl, full of curiosity and sweetness. She'd never spent much time around babies before, having left Philadelphia before her nieces and nephews were born, and she was surprised by how much she enjoyed him. Fletcher, too, seemed taken with the baby. Adelaide would often find him letting Thomas grab his fingers or making silly faces to provoke giggles. One evening, she discovered Fletcher in the rocking chair by the fire, Thomas asleep against his chest, both of them peaceful and content. "He's a good baby," Fletcher said quietly when he noticed Adelaide watching. "He is." She sat on the arm of the chair, reaching out to brush a gentle hand over Thomas's downy hair. "Lucy's lucky to have him." "We're lucky to have them here," Fletcher corrected. "The house feels more like a home with them in it." Winter settled over Montana with serious intent, bringing snow and bitter cold. The ranch work became harder, more demanding but also more satisfying. Adelaide reduced her time at the shop, letting her assistant Sarah handle more of the day-to-day operations so she could be home more. She found she didn't miss the constant bustle of the shop as much as she'd expected. Being at the ranch with Fletcher, Lucy and Thomas felt right in a way she couldn't quite explain. Christmas brought new joy. They decorated the house with pine boughs and berry branches, and Adelaide made Thomas a soft toy horse that he immediately loved. On Christmas morning, they all gathered around the fireplace, exchanging simple gifts and sharing a meal Lucy had prepared with Adelaide's help. "This is the best Christmas I've had in years," Lucy said, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for giving us a place to belong." "Your family now," Adelaide said simply, and she meant it. In January, Lucy came to Adelaide with news that would change everything. "The hotel has offered me a full-time position with better wages. I've saved almost enough to rent a small house in town." She looked torn between excitement and sadness. "I'll be able to provide properly for Thomas and me." "That's wonderful news," Adelaide said, even as her heart sank at the thought of them leaving. "It is, but I'll miss being here, miss you and Fletcher in this place." Lucy hesitated, then added, "Thomas has thrived here. He's never been as happy as he has been these past 2 months." That evening, Adelaide talked to Fletcher about Lucy's impending departure. They were getting ready for bed, the familiar intimacy of shared space and routines. "I'm going to miss them," Adelaide admitted. "The house will feel empty again." Fletcher pulled her close, his arms warm and solid around her. "I'll miss them too. Thomas especially. He's a sweet little boy." Adelaide pulled back to look at her husband's face. "What if we asked Lucy to stay? Offered to help her raise Thomas?" "What exactly are you proposing?" Adelaide had been thinking about this all day, turning it over in her mind, examining it from every angle. "What if we offered to adopt Thomas? Lucy could stay here, be part of his life, but we'd be his parents. She'd have security and stability, and we'd have the child I know we both want, even though we've been afraid to say it out loud." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, his expression serious. "That's a big decision, Adelaide, for all of us. We'd need to think it through carefully, make sure it's what Lucy wants too." "I know. But Fletcher, these past 2 months have shown me something important. I always thought I mourned not being able to have children because society told me I should. But having Thomas here, loving him, caring for him, it's awakened something in me I didn't know existed. I want to be a mother. Not because I think I should want it, but because I genuinely do." And you think adopting Thomas is the answer? I think it could be, if Lucy agrees, if you agree. She searched his face anxiously. Do you want this? Or am I pushing for something you don't really want? Fletcher cupped her face in his hands, his expression tender. I want whatever makes you happy. And truthfully, I've fallen in love with that little boy too. The thought of him leaving, of not watching him grow up, hurts more than I expected. But this has to be Lucy's choice. They approached Lucy the next day, both nervous about how she'd respond. They found her in the kitchen, Thomas playing on a blanket at her feet with his toy horse. Lucy, can we talk to you about something? Adelaide asked. Lucy looked up, immediately concerned. Of course. Is something wrong? Fletcher and Adelaide sat at the table and Lucy joined them, her expression wary. We have a proposition for you, Adelaide began carefully. But please understand, there's no pressure, and we'll support whatever decision you make. She explained their idea, laying out how they imagined it could work. Lucy could continue living at the ranch, helping with the house and raising Thomas. Fletcher and Adelaide would legally adopt Thomas, providing for his needs and making decisions about his upbringing. Lucy would always be part of his life, and when he was older, they'd tell him the truth about his parents. Lucy listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. When Adelaide finished, Lucy covered her face with her hands and sobbed. I'm sorry, Adelaide said, stricken. We've upset you. Please forget we said anything. No, Lucy choked out. No, you don't understand. These are happy tears. She lowered her hands, her face wet but smiling. I've been so scared about raising Thomas alone. I love him more than anything, but I'm terrified I won't be able to give him everything he needs. The thought of him having you as parents, growing up on this ranch with love and stability, it's more than I ever dreamed possible. So you're saying yes? Fletcher asked gently. I'm saying yes. Gratefully, joyfully yes. Lucy reached across the table to grasp both their hands. I want Thomas to have the best life possible, and I know you'll give him that. I'll still get to watch him grow, still get to be part of his life, but without the crushing weight of doing it all alone. Adelaide couldn't stop the tears that flowed down her own cheeks. We'll make sure he knows how much you love him. That you made this choice because you wanted what was best for him. I know you will. Lucy squeezed their hands. You're good people. The best people. Thomas is lucky to have you as his parents. The legal process of adoption took several months, involving meetings with a lawyer, appearances before a judge, and mountains of paperwork. But by spring, it was official. Thomas Owens, son of Fletcher and Adelaide, with Lucy as a permanent part of their family. The house became organized around Thomas's needs and schedule. Adelaide reduced her shop hours even further, entrusting more responsibility to her assistant. Fletcher adjusted his work routines so he could spend more time with his son, teaching him about horses and the land even though Thomas was still too young to understand. Martha was delighted by the addition to the family, visiting often and spoiling Thomas shamelessly. I'm an aunt, she'd say with satisfaction. I've waited years to be an aunt. As Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, his personality emerged. He was curious and fearless, always climbing, always exploring. He had Fletcher's eyes and a smile that could light up a room. He called Adelaide and Fletcher Mama and Papa, though Lucy was always Lucy and clearly beloved in her own right. On Thomas's second birthday, the family gathered for a small celebration. They'd invited Martha and Robert, Reverend Thomas for whom the boy had been named, and a few other close friends from town. Adelaide had made a cake, and Thomas had attacked it with the enthusiasm only a 2-year-old could muster, getting more on his face than in his mouth. That night, after the guests had gone and Thomas was asleep, Fletcher and Adelaide sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. Adelaide rested her head on Fletcher's shoulder, content and peaceful. "You remember that day by the creek?" she asked. "When I told you I couldn't have children?" "I remember everything about that day. You said you'd love just me, that I was enough." She turned to look at him. "You meant it, didn't you? If we'd never adopted Thomas, never expanded our family, you would have been truly happy." "Absolutely." He kissed her forehead. "Thomas is a blessing beyond measure, and I'm grateful every day for him. But Adelaide, you need to understand something. My happiness isn't dependent on circumstances or who else is in our life. My happiness comes from you, from the life we built together. Thomas adds to that joy, but he didn't create it. You did that all on your own." Adelaide's eyes filled with tears. "How did I get so lucky to find you? I ask myself the same question every single day." He pulled her closer. "About finding you, I mean. I'm the lucky one." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the sounds of the ranch settling for the night around them, the distant call of an owl, the soft snorting of horses in the barn. "You think we should consider fostering other children?" Adelaide asked eventually. "We have the room, and there are so many children who need homes." Fletcher was quiet, thinking it over. "Let's focus on Thomas for now, make sure we're giving him everything he needs. But in a few years, if we feel called to it, I'm open to the possibility. We make a good team, you and I." "I think we could handle more." "A few years," Adelaide agreed. "Let's see where life takes us." Life took them through seasons of work and rest, challenges and triumphs. Fletcher's ranch continued to grow, his reputation for training quality horses spreading throughout Montana and beyond. Adelaide's dress shop remained successful, though she'd fully handed over daily operations to her assistant, preferring to take commissions for special pieces while spending most of her time at the ranch. Thomas grew into a bright, active child who loved everything about ranch life. By age 4, he was already helping Fletcher with simple chores, his small hands eager to learn everything his father could teach him. He adored the horses, fearless in a way that sometimes gave Adelaide heart palpitations, but Fletcher insisted the boy needed to learn proper respect for the animals, not fear of them. Lucy remained an integral part of their household. She'd become like a sister to Adelaide, a trusted friend and co-parent who helped raise Thomas with love and wisdom. She never remarried, claiming she was content with her life at the ranch, part of a family that loved and valued her. When Thomas was 5, Adelaide and Fletcher did decide to foster a 6-year-old girl named Sarah, orphaned when her parents' wagon overturned crossing a river, came to stay with them. She was quiet and traumatized at first, but Thomas's natural exuberance and the family's patient love gradually drew her out of her shell. 6 months later, they officially adopted Sarah, unable to imagine their family without her. She was smart and creative, showing an early aptitude for drawing and design that Adelaide nurtured carefully. The siblings adored each other, Thomas protective of his older sister despite being younger, Sarah patient with his endless energy. The years passed in a blur of school programs and horse training, sewing projects and ranch expansion. Thomas and Sarah grew, their personalities developing, their bond with Adelaide and Fletcher deepening. Lucy remained constant, an anchor of stability and love. On Adelaide and Fletcher's 10th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for dinner. Thomas was now 12, already showing signs of the tall, strong man he'd become. Sarah was 13, blossoming into a young woman with Adelaide's grace and artistic sensibility. Lucy helped prepare the feast, and they all sat around the big table that had been too large when it was just Fletcher and Adelaide, but now was barely big enough. After dinner, Fletcher pulled Adelaide out onto the porch, wanting a moment alone with his wife. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. 10 years, he said, pulling her into his arms. Best 10 years of my life. Adelaide looped her arms around his neck. Mine too. Though I have to admit, when I stepped off that stagecoach in Miles City, I never imagined this is where I'd end up. No, I thought I'd build a business, make a life for myself, maybe find some contentment in independence and work. I never dreamed I'd find love, find a family, find all of this. She gestured to the ranch, to the house where their children's laughter echoed, to the life they'd created together. Fletcher kissed her softly. I dreamed of it once with Sarah, but what we have now, it's different. Better, maybe, because it was built on truth and choice rather than assumptions about what a life should look like. You think Sarah would approve? Adelaide asked. She rarely brought up Fletcher's first love, but tonight felt right for honesty. I think she'd be happy I found love again. Sarah was generous-hearted. She would have wanted me to live fully, not to exist in grief forever. He tucked a strand of Adelaide's hair behind her ear. But more importantly, do you feel like you're enough? Like our life is enough, more than enough, Adelaide said firmly. I spent so many years thinking I was broken, defined by what I couldn't do. But you showed me I was wrong. I'm not broken. I'm just me, and that's exactly who I was always meant to be. Exactly who you were meant to be, Fletcher echoed, kissing her again. The door opened and Thomas stuck his head out. Mama, Papa, are you coming back inside? Lucy made your favorite pie and Sarah says we can't eat it until you come back. Adelaide laughed. We're coming, sweetheart. They walked back inside together, hand in hand, to the family they'd built through love and choice and commitment. The table was indeed set with pie, and the children were bouncing with impatience. Finally, Sarah said dramatically, we thought you two were going to stay out there all night. We were having a moment, Fletcher explained, ruffling her hair affectionately despite her protests. Well, have your moments faster next time, Thomas said, already reaching for a slice of pie. Lucy's pie waits for no one. Lucy swatted his hand away. Patience, young man. Let your parents be served first. They sat around the table, passing plates and sharing stories from the day. Adelaide looked at each face around the table, Fletcher with his quiet strength and endless patience, Thomas with his boundless energy and kind heart, Sarah with her creativity and gentle wisdom, Lucy with her steady presence and unconditional love, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself back in Philadelphia. It was better. It was real and messy and sometimes challenging, but it was built on a foundation of honesty and acceptance and love that chose to see people for who they truly were rather than who they were supposed to be. Fletcher caught her eye across the table and smiled. That same smile he'd given her the day he'd said he'd love just her. And Adelaide smiled back, knowing that sometimes the best gifts in life were the ones you never knew to ask for. As the evening wore on and the children eventually headed to bed, Adelaide and Fletcher found themselves back on the porch, their favorite place for quiet conversation. The stars were brilliant overhead, the night air cool but pleasant. What are you thinking about? Fletcher asked, his arm around her shoulders. About how perfect this all is. Not perfect like flawless, but perfect like exactly right for us. Adelaide leaned into him. I'm thinking about that girl who stepped off the stagecoach 10 years ago. So scared and determined and convinced she had to build a life alone because no one would want her as she was. I wish I could tell her that everything was going to work out better than she could imagine. She was brave, that girl, coming all this way, ready to start over, refusing to let others define her worth. Fletcher kissed the top of her head. I'm glad she was brave enough to take a chance on a broken-down cowboy. You're not broken down, Adelaide protested, as she had 100 times before. "Neither are you," he countered, as he always did. "That's what we learned together, isn't it? That being whole doesn't mean being perfect or meeting someone else's expectations. It means accepting who you are and finding someone who accepts you too." Adelaide turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Fletcher Owens, more than I could ever put into words." "I love you too, Adelaide, today, tomorrow, and every day after that." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Even when you burn dinner." She laughed and swatted his chest. "That was one time, and I was distracted because Thomas had gotten into the barn and we had to fish him out of the hay loft." "Twice," Fletcher corrected. "But who's counting?" They stood there together, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out at the land they'd built their life on. Inside the house, their children slept safely, and their extended family member Lucy was probably already in bed with a book, content in her own way. The ranch stretched out before them in the darkness, the barn and corrals, the pastures where horses grazed peacefully. This was their kingdom, small and humble perhaps by some standards, but to Adelaide and Fletcher it represented everything that mattered. Home, family, love freely given and gratefully received. As they finally headed inside for the night, Adelaide took one last look at the stars and sent up a silent prayer of thanksgiving. She'd come west looking for independence and purpose, and she'd found those things. But she'd also found so much more: a love that accepted her completely, a family built on choice and commitment, and a life that proved happiness wasn't about checking boxes or meeting expectations. It was about finding someone who saw you truly and loved you anyway, who understood that sometimes the most beautiful families were the ones you built with intention and care, rather than the ones you'd been told you should want. Fletcher took her hand, and they walked into their home together, closing the door on the night but not on their future. That stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and promise, and they would face it the way they faced everything together, with love as their foundation and commitment as their guide. The story of Adelaide and Fletcher didn't end that night on their 10th anniversary. It continued through more years of joy and occasional sorrow, through watching their children grow into remarkable adults, through the expansion of Fletcher's ranch and Adelaide's growing reputation as one of Montana's finest designers. Thomas grew tall and strong, taking over more of the ranch work as Fletcher aged, eventually marrying a school teacher named Emma, who reminded Adelaide so much of her own sister that it made her heart ache with happiness. Sarah pursued her artistic talents, studying in Helena before returning to Miles City to open her own shop next to her mother's, creating beautiful jewelry and decorative pieces that became sought after throughout the territory. Lucy lived with them until her death at the age of 78, surrounded by the family she'd helped create, her last words a whispered thank you to Adelaide and Fletcher for giving her and her son a home and a future. Fletcher and Adelaide grew old together on their ranch, their love deepening with each passing year. They never tired of each other's company, never stopped finding joy in the simple act of being together. And in the years that followed, when members of the Owens family faced their own challenges and doubts, when they wondered if they were enough or if love could conquer their particular obstacles, they would remember the story of Adelaide and Fletcher. How a woman who thought she was broken met a man who saw her as whole. How they'd built a family that looked nothing like what society expected but was perfect for them. How Fletcher had smiled and said, "Then I'll love just you," and meant it with every fiber of his being, and how that simple promise had been the foundation of a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. Their story became legend in Miles City, passed down through generations as proof that the best love stories weren't about perfection or meeting expectations. They were about finding someone who saw you truly, accepted you completely, and chose you daily. They were about building a life together that honored who you both were rather than trying to fit into someone else's vision of what you should be. And late at night, when the wind blew across the Montana grassland and through the valley where the ranch still stood, generations later still in the Owens family, people swore they could sometimes hear laughter and quiet conversation, the sound of two souls who'd found each other against all odds and refused to let anything diminish the love they'd fought so hard to build and protect. Adelaide and Fletcher's story was one of hope and healing, of love that chose truth over pretense, acceptance over judgment. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that family could be chosen as much as given. That wholeness came from within rather than from meeting external expectations. And that sometimes the greatest act of courage was allowing yourself to be loved exactly as you were. In the end, that was their legacy, not just the ranch or the businesses or the children and grandchildren who carried their name and their values forward into the future. Their legacy was the simple, profound truth that had guided their entire life together. Love, real love, wasn't about what you could give or produce or become. It was about two people deciding every single day to see each other truly and choose each other completely. Everything else, the joy, the family, the life they built flowed naturally from that one foundational choice. And it all started with a woman stepping off a stagecoach in Miles City, Montana in the summer of 1883, carrying a secret she thought would condemn her to loneliness, and a man who looked at her and saw not her limitations but her limitless worth, who promised to love just her and kept that promise every day for the rest of his life. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything,